When fragments of the Epic of Gilgamesh were first translated, historians hailed it as the beginning of human storytelling. Andrew George called it something far more dangerous, the moment when humanity reopened a door that ancient civilizations had sealed shut for a reason. He said the tablets contain knowledge too specific to be myth, detailed accounts of creation, destruction, and the limits placed on human life. Astronomical references, a moon, a star, various symbols that could even be symbolized by a wristwatch, technology used 6,000 years ago. For George, the epic was not humanity's first story. It was humanity's first warning. The discovery of something that was never meant to be found. In 1849, British explorer Austen Henry Layard found something strange beneath the sands of present-day Iraq. His team had been searching the ruins of Nineveh, the capital of ancient Assyria, when they discovered rooms filled with tens of thousands of clay tablets. The site became known as the Library of Assur-Bonaparte, named for the last great Assyrian king who ruled from 668 to 627 BC. Many of the tablets were broken, some burned black by an ancient fire. Yet somehow, the text carved on them had survived. These fragments would soon reveal the oldest story humanity has ever told. For years, the tablets sat in the British Museum collecting dust. Then, in 1872, a quiet museum assistant, George Smith, began studying them. Smith was self-taught, but he had a gift for reading the wedge-shaped script called Kun and Four. One afternoon, while translating a damaged tablet from the pile, he froze. The words described a flood so vast that it drowned all living things, leaving only one man alive in a large boat filled with animals. The man's name was Utonishtim. Smith realized what he was reading. This was the same story of Noah's Ark, but thousands of years older. The discovery shocked Victorian England. People had been taught that the book of Genesis was the oldest account of creation and the flood. Smith's translation proved that the Bible version had come later because the clay tablets he studied were written in Akkadian during the reign of King Ashurbanipal around 1000 BCE. They were themselves copies of much older Sumerian and Babylonian stories that dated back almost 1,000 years. That meant the story of the Mesopotamian flood existed in written form long before the Hebrew Bible was compiled. The story of the flood first appeared in the Epic of Gilgamesh, written in Akkadian, the language of Babylon. The tale had been passed down for centuries, probably first composed around 1100 BCE by Sumerian poets who told the story of a powerful king, Gilgamesh of Uruk, who sought eternal life after his friend and kid died. Modern scholars credit a Babylonian scribe named Senechi Unini, who lived around 1100 BCE, with compiling the final version we now call the Epic of Gilgamesh. In the 11th tablet of the epic, Utanapistum tells Gilgamesh how the gods decided to destroy humanity for its noise and defiance. The god Aya secretly warned Utanapishtim to build a huge ship and fill it with the seed of all living creatures. The storm lasted 6 days and nights until all of humanity was turned to clay. When Utanapishtim released a dove and a raven, and they did not return, he knew the waters had receded. He made a sacrifice, and the gods, smelling the sweet smoke, gathered like flies to the offering. It was the world's first recorded flood myth, and possibly its first apocalypse. Smith was overwhelmed by what he had discovered. Witnesses say he leapt from his chair and ran around the museum in tears of excitement. But just a few years later, he died suddenly of illness in Mesopotamia while searching for more fragments. Assyriologist Andrew George later commented, "He opened a door we were never meant to open." What he meant was that Smith's discovery did more than reveal ancient history. It challenged the idea that sacred history began with the Bible and showed that even its most divine events could have more ancient human origins. If the flood story was not a one-time revelation from God, but an account of something much older, then what else on those clay tablets had been borrowed, rewritten, or origins? If the flood story was not a one-time revelation from God, but an account of something much older, then what else on those clay tablets had been borrowed, rewritten, or deliberately changed before it reached us. The question would haunt every scholar who touched the tablets. It was no longer just a poem. It was the first act of rebellion against the gods, and the next discovery would reveal how writing itself became a weapon against them. The epic that rewrote creation. When scholars first pieced together the opening lines of the Gilgamesh epic, Andrew George was among those who felt the full weight of what the ancient words revealed. He later said that the text does not begin where creation stories are supposed to begin. The prologue does not describe how the world or humanity began. It begins with Gilgamesh, already alive, ruling, and partly divine. There is no moment of creation, no fashioning from dust, no divine breath. Humanity simply exists. For Andrew George, this detail was crucial. The line describing Gilgamesh as 2/3 divine and 1/3 human was not just a poetic way of saying he was great. It reflected what the ancient Mesopotamians believed about human nature itself, that people were made of mixed origins, part mortal and part something superior, but never entirely either. This idea completely contradicted the later belief found in the Bible that humans were the pure and intentional creation of a single god. In this ancient tale, Gilgamesh ruled the city of Uruk, a walled paradise of his own design. He would walk its high walls and look at all he possessed, but still he felt empty. His people feared him and called him cruel. George once asked at a conference, "What does it say about us that the first king in human literature had everything except peace?" Like Adam in the Garden of Eden, Gilgamesh lived in abundance but could not rest. The gods had given him power and knowledge, but not contentment. This endless hunger became, as George described it, the first human flaw recorded in writing. The Babylonian scribe Sinlechi Unini collected ancient Sumerian tales and transformed them into a comprehensive tale of pride and punishment. In his version, the gods are not wise guardians, but jealous overseers who resent the growing strength of their creations. When Gilgamesh's ambitions begin to rival their own, they sent Enkidu, a wild man born of clay, to break his hubris. To George, this was the first record of divine envy, an ancient warning that humanity's quest for greatness always comes at a price. The Mesopotamian myths surrounding the epic were even darker. In the Enuma Elish, humans are formed from clay mixed with the blood of a slain god named Kingu. George explained that this was not a story of love or purpose, but of servitude. The gods created humanity not to share the sky with them, but to be freed from labor. Humanity was born to serve, not to rule. This grim idea, George believed, endured through time, reshaped but never erased. During the translation, he noticed that the opening lines used a plural word for creators. That same plural appears in Genesis chapter 1, where God is called Elohim, meaning the gods. George wondered if both traditions had sprung from a shared, forgotten source, a time when creation was the work of many powers, not one. If the epic that began in ancient Uruk could challenge everything humanity believed about its own origin, what might lie hidden in the verses that followed? The next scholar seeking those answers would discover how dangerous it could be to understand what the gods once wrote. The man who tried translating the gods. For most scholars, translation is an act of understanding. For George Smith and Andrew George, it became something closer to possession. Each man who devoted his life to the Epic of Gilgamesh seemed to leave a part of himself buried in it. Smith died at age 36 in Mesopotamia, the same desert where the tablets had been found. Later researchers whispered that he died too close to the text, although the official cause was dysentery. What troubled people was that several scholars who studied the tablets after Smith began to report the same strange experiences. Some said they heard low voices whispering in Akkadian as they worked late into the night. Others described vivid dreams filled with words they did not understand upon awakening. The sounds were rhythmic, like chanting, but no one could explain where they came from or why the dreams always stopped once they left the project. Andrew George, who would later reconstruct the entire epic from over 300 broken fragments, he worked mostly in silence. Colleagues said he became withdrawn, living like a man in exile. He described the work as a kind of obsession. Sometimes, while reading aloud from the tablets, he would stop in mid-sentence and watch the words as if they were changing before him. Epic himself seems to understand what language can do to a person. In the second tablet, the wild man in Enkidu meets a temple woman named Shamhat, who has been sent to tame him. In Enkidu, he lives like an animal, running with the gazelles and drinking from the rivers without contact with human life. Shat uses speech, song, and tenderness to draw him away from the wild nature. The text reads, "The harlot spoke, and his mind expanded. His words awakened self-awareness in him, teaching him what it means to be human." It is one of the first moments in literature where language itself transforms the nature of a being. George often said that this line haunted him. It made him wonder if translators experience the same thing, becoming something new each time they extract meaning from ancient words. He confessed privately that the more he translated, the less he felt like the author of his own sentences. "Sometimes I feel as if the text is translating me," he told an interviewer. His notes began to slip from description to reenactment. Instead of Gilgamesh weeping, sentences, "Sometimes I feel as if the text is translating me," he told an interviewer. His notes began to slip from description to reenactment. Instead of Gilgamesh weeping, he would write, "I weep." Reading the line, "He who saw the deep," George began to use the present tense, saying, "I see the deep." Quote, "Students noticed it and thought it was poetic. Friends thought it was exhaustion. But George himself said that words had a will of their own. Friends thought it was exhaustion. But George himself said that words had a will of their own." In ancient traditions, words had power. In Jewish mysticism, it was believed that mispronouncing the divine name could bring madness or death. Andrew George often compared this idea to what he faced in his own work. The Akkadian language used on the Gilgamesh tablets was no ordinary tongue. It was the language of priests and magicians, used in prayers, oaths, and curses. Translating it was more than simply reading it. It meant pronouncing the same sounds that ancient scribes used when invoking their gods or trying to banish harmful spirits. George realized that each translation was, in a sense, a reenactment of those rituals. He began to wonder if the tablets had been written that way on purpose, not just to tell a story, but to accomplish something when read aloud. Near the end of his work, he began to notice something he couldn't explain. Certain passages didn't stay consistent when I translated them. Every time I went back, the meaning seemed to change. "You read them and they erase themselves," he wrote in his notes. When pressed to explain, he described a fragment that seemed unlike any other. The text looped back on itself, ending exactly where it began, as if it were meant to trap the reader inside him. That was the one tablet he was never able to complete, and it became the one that haunted him the most. The hidden tablet that should not exist. For centuries, it was believed that the Epic of Gilgamesh ended with Tablet 12, the puzzling chapter where Enkidu somehow returns from the dead. The text shows Gilgamesh speaking to his long-dead friend, asking what life is like in the underworld. Scholars have struggled to explain it. In the previous tablets, Enkidu had been mourned and buried. His death occurred after he and Gilgamesh had killed the Bull of Heaven and the guardian Jumbaba, both acts that defied the gods. As punishment for his hubris, the gods killed him. They decreed that one of the two friends must die, and chose Enkidu, who, plagued by illness and terrifying visions of the underworld, cursed his fate and died in agony. Yet in Tablet 12, he walks and speaks again. The ending feels disconnected, almost forbidden. It reads like an intrusion from another world, a scene that should not exist within the same story. It reads like an intrusion from another world, a scene that should not exist within the same story. Andrew George often called Tablet 12 a problem that refuses to die. He explained that it was written in a different dialect and style than the previous tablets, suggesting that it was added later from an older Sumerian source. To him, it was not a simple continuation, but an interruption. It is not resurrection in the sacred sense, he said. It is an intrusion. The dead return, but not because the gods allow it. The scene does not carry the peace of divine mercy. Instead, it shows a friendship that defies cosmic law, a human voice that reaches in. In the land of the dead, For George, this was what made Gilgamesh extraordinary. It was the first story to ask whether love or grief could conquer death itself. Then a new enigma emerged. In 2021, an archaeological team working near Mosul, Iraq, not far from ancient Nineveh, reportedly unearthed a small clay fragment written in inverted cuneiform. The markings appeared upside down, as if they were meant to be read only in reflection. No official document was ever published, but rumors began to circulate in academic circles, calling it the 13th tablet. Photographs circulated privately, and George is said to have reviewed them. He never confirmed it publicly, but one student recalled him saying, "If it's real, it doesn't belong to the living." Quote, linguists who examine the images claim that a single line could be read, "He who reads awakens what sleeps." The pattern of inverted text resembled those used in ancient Mesopotamian funerary incantations, particularly in the Descent of Ishtar, where mirror writing was used for messages addressed to the dead. The supposed tablet did not continue the story of Enkidu. Instead, it seemed to comment on the act of reading itself. It seemed a warning to anyone attempting to conjure meaning from words once spoken to the gods. George refused to call it authentic, but he never dismissed it. Some texts, he told a colleague, were not written to be read. They were written to be obeyed by him. Tablet 12 and the rumored Tablet 13 were connected not by story but by purpose. Both challenged the line between life and death, one through narrative, the other through ritual. Andrew George's ultimate conclusion about the tablets was not comforting. If Tablet 12 and the rumored Tablet 13 were connected, then they weren't simply myths about death and return. They were warnings written in the language of the gods and instructions that only mortals would be desperate enough to read. And if those instructions weren't meant for us, the question that kept recurring in his notes was a terrifying one. What happens when the living read what was written for the dead? The gods feeding on death. The Epic of Gilgamesh is often read as a story about mortality, but Andrew George believed its true theme was much darker. It's not just about fearing death, he once said. It's about feeding it. When he studied the tablets closely, he found a recurring image, the gods enjoying the scent of sacrifice. After Gilgamesh and Enkidu slay Jumbaba, the guardian of the cedar forest, and later the bull of heaven, the gods are enraged. To balance the offense, they decree that one of the two men must die. Enkidu's death is presented as a punishment, but George argued that the text suggests otherwise. The gods gather like flies to the sacrifice. That phrase, he noted, is the earliest description of divine appetite. This idea of feeding the divine through human suffering is not unique to Gilgamesh. It also appears in the Bible. In Exodus chapter 29, God is described as delighting in the pleasing aroma of burnt offerings. The Akkadian phrase used in the epic means the same thing, the aroma of humanity. What both traditions share is the belief that divine satisfaction comes from death, that the act of sacrifice keeps the cosmos stable. In Mesopotamia, families would leave food and drink before statues of their gods so that these divine figures could eat. Temples also served as kitchens. The system of worship was based on feeding what humans feared most, which are the invisible forces that govern their fate. George pointed out an omitted line he found mentioned in a damaged commentary tablet. They drank the scent of the dead. He believed this line was not symbolic, but a literal statement of belief. To the ancient Mesopotamians, the gods did not live on light, air, or divine power. They lived on the energy that came from death itself, the moment when life ended and something eternal was released. Each death, in their view, nourished the gods and kept the universe in balance. This meant that Enkidu's death in the story was not just a punishment for killing the bull of heaven. It was part of a system of giving. The gods demanded life, and Enkidu became their offering. Gilgamesh's pain, his mourning, his tears, and even his storytelling became part of that same offering. Each time people remembered the dead or retold the story, they repeated the act that nourished the gods. The supposed 13th tablet seemed to confirm this idea. Its line, odds. The supposed 13th tablet seemed to confirm this idea. Its line, he who reads awakens what sleeps, took on new meaning for George. If Tablet 12 showed Enkidu's spirit speaking to Gilgamesh from the underworld, then Tablet 13 warned that reading those same words could cause the same thing to happen again. Each time the story was read or spoken aloud, it could symbolically call the dead back to consciousness, keeping their presence and the power of the gods active among the living. George's conclusion was disturbing. If the gods gain strength from human pain, then they need people to continue to mourn and remember. Forgetting them would starve them. Remembering keeps them alive. The Epic of Gilgamesh feared that he survives for that very reason, because he still fulfills the same ancient function. He keeps alive the cycle of death, memory, and divine hunger. If that belief is true, then immortality is not a gift from the gods, but their greatest threat. A world without death would end their power, and that, George believed, is why the Epic of Gilgamesh endures, because the gods do not let it die. The epic that wouldn't stay dead. When Andrew George retired from teaching, he believed his life's work was finished. But the Epic of Gilgamesh refused to sit still. Within months of his final lecture, new fragments began to surface, some sold anonymously to museums, others emerged in private collections with no clear record of their provenance. Each fragment added lines that scholars had never seen before, yet the grammar and vocabulary were undeniably authentic. The oldest of these turned up in 2003, and they continued to surface well into the next 2 decades. Many of them contained characters that did not match any known cuneiform style, as if they had been copied by someone who understood the language, but not the traditional script. To researchers, this strange resurgence felt almost supernatural. George described it as the text rewriting itself throughout history. Each generation seemed to uncover just enough material to keep the story alive. Scientists began using images. Infrared and ultraviolet light were used to study the damaged tablets, and the results deepened the mystery even more. Hidden beneath the visible writing were faint impressions, ghost signs, as one researcher called them, that changed shape under spectral light. In some places, new words appeared where there had previously been only cracks. When scanned again days later, those same spots looked different. Then came the digital reconstructions. AI trained in ancient languages began generating missing parts of the text, predicting what previous scribes might have written. The results were not random. AI trained in ancient languages began generating missing parts of the text, predicting what previous scribes might have written. The results were not random. Versions of the AI produced new lines that made grammatical and narrative sense, as if the poem were completing itself via machine. One program even produced a phrase that appeared in no known record. "I am the one who endures," George said quietly. That is exactly what Gilgamesh would have said. The epic itself contains a scene that reflects this strange survival. On tablet 11, Napishtim tells the Gilgamesh on the plant of life that restores you. Gilgamesh retrieves it, but before he can use it, a serpent steals it and renews itself. The power of the plant is not lost, it simply changes form. George saw the same pattern in the enduring nature of the epic. Each time the text is damaged, forgotten, or rewritten, it returns in a new form. Like the serpent, the story feeds on decay to stay alive. For some, the parallels became unsettling. Religious scholars compared it to the opening of the Gospel of John, where it says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." In that passage, the Word, or Logos, represents divine speech that becomes life itself through creation. They argue that Gilgamesh behaves in a similar way. His words continue to give life to the story each time they are spoken or read. In that sense, the epic became a pre-biblical version of the living word, surviving through human memory and narration. The story no longer needed its author. It lived on through the people who continued to give it life. George once said that each person who reads Gilgamesh becomes part of his rebirth. Each reading completes the ritual. He wrote, "It lives on through us because we cannot stop speaking it." Which brings us back to his final plea, not to decipher more, but to listen before the cycle begins anew. "Before I die, please listen." In his last public lectures, Andrew George often began with the same quiet words, "Before I die, please listen." Those who attended said his voice had a tone of urgency rather than dismissal. He no longer spoke like a historian describing an ancient text. He spoke like a man who had seen too much into it. What he revealed in those last years disturbed many of his colleagues. He warned that humanity was beginning to follow the same path that had doomed its first great hero. The ancient quest for immortality, once carved in clay, was being remade in circuitry and code. George often reminded his students that Gilgamesh's greatest mistake was not his cruelty or pride, but his refusal to accept limits. When his friend Enkidu died, Gilgamesh could not bear the thought of an end. He crossed deserts, mountains, and in seas to find eternal life, only to be told that death was the fate of all humanity. Yet in modern laboratories, George saw the same hunger re-emerging. Artificial intelligence, cloning, digital consciousness, and the dream of uploading human minds into machines. They were all new versions of the same ancient obsession. We are still chasing what destroyed him, he said. In the final tablet of the epic, Gilgamesh realizes that the great walls he built around Uruk will remain long after he is gone. For centuries, readers saw this as a message about leaving a lasting legacy. Andrew George disagreed. He argued that the gods allowed Gilgamesh to build those walls not as a reward, but as a test. They let him believe that he had conquered time so that he would feel the pain of watching everything he created eventually fall. To George, the walls were not symbols of success. They were reminders that every human achievement, no matter how great, will one day disappear. He encountered that same warning reflected in the supposed 13th tablet. According to the few who claim to have read the line, it ended with the words, "Whoever rebuilds what was drowned will drown again." George called it the most terrifying sentence ever written. It suggested that each time humanity attempts to rebuild what nature or time has taken away, what was drowned will drown again. George called it the most terrifying sentence ever written. It suggested that each time humanity attempts to rebuild what nature or time has taken away, it repeats the same punishment. Every civilization that rediscovers Gilgamesh eventually begins to reflect him by seeking immortality, pushing its limits, and collapsing under the weight of its ambition. For George, the Epic of Gilgamesh is no longer just an ancient tale. It is a warning about the future. He believed that the script an ancient tale. It is a warning about the future. He believed that the scribes who first wrote it understood a truth that modern people still ignore. Death gives value to life. Without it, love, courage, and purpose lose their meaning. He told his students, "Before you die, please listen. The curse of Gilgamesh is that we never learn." What he wants people to see is that the epic's message still applies today, even if no one is walking through deserts in search of eternal life. Modern humanity tries to escape death in quieter ways, chasing youth, clinging to technology, and constructing digital versions of ourselves that never fade. People pour their lives into screens, data, and legacies in the hopes of being remembered forever. George warns that this obsession with lasting forever blinds us to the simple fact that meaning only exists because time is running out. His message is clear. The Epic of Gilgamesh was never just about one man's quest for immortality. It's about our own, our constant attempt to push our limits rather than live fully within them. And that quest, he said, is still happening.